After 40 years at Langston Aerospace, I was 3 weeks from retirement when the email went out. Subject line: Celebrating a legacy. Body: Join us in honoring Paul Bennett's exceptional career. Retirement reception scheduled for Friday, 3 p.m. in the main conference hall. Refreshments provided. I stared at the message for a long time, not sure how to feel. Relief, maybe. Gratitude. A quiet sort of pride. But also something else, like a page about to turn before I was finished reading. Names: Paul Bennett, 65 years old. Senior Project Manager for Langston's Defense Programs Division. I started here when punch cards were still a thing, and cell phones came with belt clips. I've seen 4 CEOs, 5 reorganizations, and 1 hostile takeover. Through it all, I stayed. Not because I had to, because I believed in the work. For the past 6 months, I'd been training Evan Carter to take my place. Smart kid, late 30s, polished shoes and a firm handshake. Graduated from some Ivy League school, talked in acronyms and metrics like they were native tongue. Always smiling, always asking questions, but the kind that feel rehearsed. He'd sit in my office, taking notes on a tablet, while I walked him through proprietary logistics systems and contract compliance protocols, things that don't live in manuals. He nodded a lot, wrote fast. But I noticed he never asked why we did things a certain way. Just how to do them faster. A week ago, he'd asked about the retirement party. "You gonna say something when they give you the plaque?" he'd asked, grinning. "I'll probably keep it short," I replied. No one remembers speeches. They remember how you made their job easier. Evan laughed, but didn't respond. Just tapped something into his tablet. Now, with the memo out and balloons being ordered, people were stopping by my office to shake my hand, to say it wouldn't be the same without me. I smiled, thanked them, meant it. Still, that feeling lingered, like I'd forgotten to lock a door, like someone was waiting for the lights to dim before making their move. I should have listened to that feeling. Monday morning started like any other. Coffee, inbox, the quiet hum of the HVAC overhead. I was finishing up a final report for the DoD when Jenna Riley's assistant knocked on my open door. "Jenna would like to see you in her office. HR will be there too." I paused mid-sentence, rereading the line I'd just typed, then saved my draft, stood up, and followed her down the hall. Jenna Riley, Vice President of Operations. 6 years my junior, but fast-tracked since year 2. Sharp suits, sharper eyes. The kind of executive who smiled with her mouth but never her eyes. HR rep was already seated when I walked in. Melanie, the one who always avoided eye contact in the break room. "Paul," Jenna began, motioning for me to sit. "We'll get straight to it. Due to restructuring and long-term budget optimization, your position is being eliminated effective immediately. No small talk. No transition. Just that." I didn't speak. Just nodded once. "We've prepared a severance package," Melanie said, sliding a folder across the table. 2 weeks' pay. Continuation of health benefits through the end of the month. 2 weeks. After 4 decades. I opened the folder, skimmed the terms. The ink might as well have said, "You don't matter anymore." Jenna folded her hands. "We appreciate everything you've done. Truly. But the company's evolving, and we need to stay lean and agile." I closed the folder and placed it back on the table. "What about the retirement reception?" I asked. Jenna's expression didn't change. "It's been canceled. We thought it best to move forward quietly." Move forward quietly, like sweeping dust off the floor. I stood, buttoned my blazer. Understood. No protest. No outburst. Just the same professionalism I'd brought every day since 1984. Jenna offered a handshake I didn't take. As I walked back to my office, I saw Evan Carter watching me from the end of the hall. He didn't smile this time, just looked down and stepped aside. I packed my things in silence: photos, a pen from my first contract signing, a small wooden model of the X9 project we'd patented in '98. When I left the building, no one followed. No applause, no balloons. Just the sound of the automatic doors closing behind me. But I wasn't done. Not yet. The walk from Jenna's office to my own felt longer than usual. The kind of walk you only take once down a corridor where you've spent most of your waking life. Past walls you helped build. Under lights you watched flicker through layoffs, promotions, and Christmas parties. No one had said a word yet. Word hadn't spread. I unlocked my office for the last time. Sat in the chair that still bore the faint imprint of 4 decades of quiet routine, looked around. The bookshelves I'd built myself when they cut the furniture budget. The signed project posters on the walls. The model F-14 my daughter gave me when she was 12. It all felt like mine, but it never really was. I didn't waste time. Pulled a cardboard box from under my desk, the one I kept just in case. Started placing items in 1x1 pen cup. Desk photo of Carol and I in Maine. A NASA mug from my first conference presentation. No rush. No ceremony. Just process. By the time word got around, I was already halfway out the door. A few of the younger engineers gathered in the hallway, whispering. Jason from Analytics looked stunned. "Mr. Bennett, is it true?" I gave him a small nod. Time catches up to all of us. "But we were planning something for your retirement." "The party." "Cancelled," I said simply. They looked like someone had unplugged the sun. I didn't linger. Just offered a steady smile and kept walking. At the exit, I turned in my badge. Security scanned it with the same indifference they showed visitors. I handed over my keycard, signed a line on a generic exit form, and nodded. Then I stepped outside. The parking lot looked the same, but the wait was different now. No more meetings. No more red lines. No more being the one they called at 11:58 on a Friday. I placed the box on the passenger seat, sat behind the wheel, and exhaled. Not angry. Not even sad. Just focused. Because while they were busy moving me out, they never stopped to ask what I might already know. And what I had quietly taken with me. A year before they showed me the door, I noticed the first crack. It was small, just a line item in a quarterly report. A 40-0 consulting fee to a vendor I'd never heard of. When I asked Jenna about it in a meeting, she brushed it off. "Strategic outsourcing," she said. "Nothing to worry about." But I'd learned long ago. People only say nothing to worry about when they don't want you looking deeper. So I started watching. Not loudly. Not with accusations or memos. Just observation. That's the thing about staying in one place long enough, you stop needing to ask questions out loud. You just notice the answers. I began backing up files. Quietly. End-of-quarter project records. Signed approval chains. Budget allocations. Change logs from internal systems. I made copies encrypted. Time-stamped. Archived. Not on company drives. On private storage. I also kept a journal. Handwritten. Dated entries. Who said what? What was approved and when? Any meeting where something didn't feel right went in the book, including the growing presence of Evan Carter. Evan had started asking about legacy workflows. Wanted to streamline reporting, consolidate access credentials, automate compliance checks. Sounded smart, efficient. But it wasn't what he was asking that concerned Mate, was what he was avoiding. He never asked about data audits or contractor accountability. Never once brought up the classified retention policy that governed our DoD contracts. That's when I knew. They were positioning him for my role. But they weren't just planning to replace me. They were planning to erase me. Strip the oversight, obscure the history, wipe the fingerprints from every system I'd spent my life building. So, I tightened my grip. I printed physical records, collected backup logs, had them notarized where possible, secured them in a deposit box Carol didn't even know about. I wasn't hoarding secrets. I was safeguarding truth. They thought I'd leave quietly. That 40 years of loyalty ended with a handshake and a generic folder. But I wasn't just walking out. I was walking away, with the one thing they didn't think to protect. Receipts. The project was called Crimson Echo, a multi-year defense initiative tied to satellite communications and encrypted tactical relays. $680 million in federal funding, half a dozen oversight agencies, and strict DoD compliance protocols. I'd been managing it since inception. My name was on every phase gate, every security review. It was the kind of contract that didn't forgive mistakes. 3 months before my exit, I flagged a discrepancy in the quarterly compliance audit. A vendor, Harker Systems, was billing for software patches we hadn't deployed. Minor amounts at first, 2, $800 here, 3, $400 there, but it didn't align. I brought it up in a meeting with Jenna and Evan. Jenna waved it off as accounting lag. Evan said they'd review it in Q2. They didn't. I documented it. Added the details to my private log. Screenshots. Time-stamped memos. Purchase orders. I submitted a follow-up through internal compliance, but the ticket was quietly closed 2 days later. No audit, no response. Just silence. But here's what they didn't know. I'd once spearheaded a data redundancy initiative years back when a vendor breach triggered a full compliance review. As part of it, I'd set up an off-site backup node for contract oversight. A mirror server. Fully encrypted, air-gapped, and forgotten by most. I still had access. Late one night, a week after my termination, I drove out to a rented workspace I'd maintained for years under a side consulting license. Clean. Unconnected. I logged into the backup server. The logs were intact. Every change request. Every approval chain, including internal memos from Jenna reclassifying certain vendors as special operations to avoid audit triggers. I cross-checked them with public procurement databases and Langston's old SAP logs. Patterns emerged. Names repeated. So did evasion tactics. They thought pushing me out cleared the board. But I'd built the board. And now, I had every piece still in place. Not out of vengeance, out of principle. Because there are things you don't get to donut on government dollars. Not under my watch. And definitely not with my name still tied to the contracts you're trying to launder. I found it in line 473 of a procurement log buried between innocuous line items for cable routing and panel housings. Vendor. Harker Systems. Item. Encrypted module retrofit Q3 compliance install. Cost. $38,950. It caught my eye because I knew the modules hadn't been installed. I would have signed off on them. No one else had the clearance level for that portion of the project. So I checked the project ledger. My credentials were listed as the approving officer. Digitally signed. Time-stamped. Clean. Except I'd never approved that purchase. And I don't make 0 decisions without writing it down in my journal. I pulled the purchase order metadata. The approval was logged on a day I was off-site, attending a compliance seminar in D.C. Verified by my travel receipts, hotel keycard logs, and a badge swipe at Langley. Someone had forged it. Digitally cloned my credential chain. Evan had access to those tools she'd requested temporary elevated permissions during a system update 3 weeks before I left. Jenna had signed off. Coincidence? I didn't believe in them anymore. I started cross-referencing every major purchase under my name from the past year. More entries. Surfaced consulting invoices. Software licenses. Inflated installation fees. Nothing outrageous. Just enough to dodge red flags. But altogether, over 700, all tied to Crimson Echo. All under my digital signature. They weren't just cutting me out. They were lining up a scapegoat. A decorated, soon-to-retire project lead with a spotless record. If the feds came knocking, I'd be the name on every fraudulent form. Evan would shrug. Jenna would cite legacy system confusion. The company would issue a statement about a tragic error in judgment. And I'd be left holding a bag I never packed. But they made one mistake. They underestimated how carefully I'd been watching. And how long I'd been preparing. Because now I wasn't just defending my reputation, I was building a timeline, a story with receipts, a trap so airtight that when it sprung shut, the only thing they'd be able to say was, "We didn't think he'd notice." But I noticed, and I wasn't done. I hadn't spoken to Megan Russo in 3 years, not since she left Langston for a position with the Defense Contract Audit Agency. Back then, we shared quiet lunches in the old break room, trading war stories about budget meetings and non-compliant vendors. She had a mind like a scalpel, precise, quiet, effective. When she left, I told her she'd finally escaped the fire. She said, "Paul, the fire just burns hotter where I'm going." I found her personal number in an old contacts file I kept in my Rolodex. Dialed it. She answered on the third ring. "Paul Bennett," she said. "Didn't expect to hear from you. I wouldn't be calling if it weren't important." A pause. "You sound calm. That means it's bad." We met the next morning at a diner just outside Arlington. No uniforms, no laptops. Just a manila envelope on the seat beside me, and a pair of eyes across the table that still missed nothing. I slid the envelope across the table. "I need your opinion. Off the record." She opened it, flipped through the first few pages. Her face didn't change, but she stopped, stirring her coffee. "Crimson Echo?" she asked, voice low. "You were lead on that." "Was. Until last week." "Paul, this is bad. Some of these vendors are blacklisted. The payments are structured to avoid Tier 1 audits. That's not an accident." "I know." She closed the folder carefully. "If even half of this holds up under scrutiny, we're talking about Title 18 violations, wire fraud, defense contract tampering. This isn't just company discipline. This is federal." I figured. She looked at me hard. "You're sitting on a live wire. If you go forward, do it clean, quiet, no press, no leaks. And for God's sake, don't confront anyone directly. You do that, you give them a reason to paint you as a bitter retiree with an axe to grind." "I've already got the axe," I said, finishing my coffee. "I'm just choosing where to swing it." She didn't smile. "Be careful. People go to prison over stuff like this. And not always the right people." I waited 48 hours after meeting with Megan. Reviewed everything again twice. Double-checked the timestamps, cross-referenced the logs, reread my notes from last year. Then I opened a clean laptop, connected through a VPN, routed through 3 countries, and uploaded 2 dossiers. One to Langston's internal audit team. The other to the Department of Defense's Contract Oversight Division. Anonymous tip. Subject line: Crimson Echo. Financial irregularities and credential misuse. I included just enough detail to force a second look, not enough to trigger suspicion about the source. A breadcrumb trail, not a headline. Then I closed the laptop, locked it in a drawer, and did something that felt strangely harder. I opened a blank document titled, "Lessons from 40 Years in Aerospace." It was meant to be a farewell blog post, something quiet, reflective, a way to end things on my own terms. I wrote about lessons learned, colleagues I admired, what it meant to build something that lasts. I didn't publish it. Not yet. Instead, I picked up the phone and called a number I hadn't used in a decade. William Harding Langston, board member, retired colonel, and one of the few men at the top who still understood the difference between leadership and management. He answered on the first ring. "Paul Bennett. To what do I owe the honor? Need 15 minutes of your time. In person." A pause. "You never ask for anything." "I'm asking now." We met at the Veterans Hall just outside Fairfax. Neutral ground. No corporate ears, no email trails. I handed him a folder abridged, annotated, and surgical in its construction. William read every page without speaking. When he finished, he didn't ask for clarification. He just said, "Tell me who else knows." "So far, just you, and one person in federal oversight." He nodded once. You've done your part. I'll do mine. As I walked to my car, the sun was just starting to dip below the tree line. The air smelled like pine and gasoline. The fuse was lit, and I wasn't looking back. It started with a headline buried deep in a Monday morning industry brief. DoD launches routine audit of Langston Aerospace defense contracts. Just 12 words. No accusations, no fanfare. But inside Langston, it may as well have been a fire alarm. By noon, the audit wasn't routine anymore. Employees were pulled from meetings. Compliance officers huddled behind closed doors. Internal access logs were frozen mid-refresh. Someone in HR accidentally replied, all to a thread with the subject line, urgent, who has Crimson Echo files. I wasn't there to see it, but I could imagine it. Jenna Riley, reviewing old emails, trying to remember which ones she BCC'd. Evan Carter pretending he didn't hear the buzz, head down, fingers typing hard on a laptop that used to be mine. They were scrambling. I was on my porch. The morning sun crept over the horizon, catching the steam from my mug. Carol was out walking the dog. The only thing I was rushing was the cooling coffee. My phone buzzed. First once. Then again. By 10:15, I'd missed 5 calls Langston's main line, Jenna's direct number, and one labeled unknown, which usually means legal or worse. I let each one go to voicemail. Not out of pettiness. Out of patience. Across the street, my neighbor waved as he stepped into his car. I nodded back, slow and easy. No need to explain why I suddenly had so much free time. People see retirement and assume peace. I wasn't about to tell them I was watching a house I built catch fire from a safe distance. Inside, the old laptop blinked quietly in the corner. Server access still live. Logs still backing up. They thought the fallout would come from above. They never realized the leak started below. And the thing about a slow leak? It always finds the cracks. She called that evening 6:42 p.m. on the dot. I let it ring twice before answering. Paul. Jenna's voice was warm, practiced. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Not at all, I said, sipping my coffee. Just finishing the day. I wanted to check in. About the transition. Your exit. It was abrupt. That's one word for it. She gave a small laugh, just the right amount of sheepish. Yes, well, some things got lost in the shuffle. We should have handled it better. I've been meaning to reach out. I could hear the anxiety under the words, polished but strained. She wasn't calling to make amends. She was fishing, testing the water, trying to figure out how much I knew, and more importantly, what I planned to do with it. You've heard about the audit, I assume? She asked casually. Bits and pieces, I replied. Word travels. Apparently someone sent some troubling documentation. Completely out of context. Of course. Of course. I let the silence stretch. Jenna filled it. Paul, we've always valued your integrity. I hope, whatever's going around, you know we're handling it internally. No need for outside noise. That was her playdown play. Deflect, disarm. She didn't know if the documents were mine. She just hoped I hadn't connected the final dots. Funny thing about systems, I said, letting my voice settle into something calm and neutral. They keep records. A pause. I could hear her breath catch. And not just the records you keep in the office, I continued, but the ones you think you deleted, the ones archived off, network, old backups, revision logs, they never really go away. Paul, she said slowly, tone shifting, are you implying something? No, I replied. Just reminiscing. 40 years gives a man time to understand how deep the roots go. More silence. Then her voice, cooler now. I see. Well, I appreciate you taking the call. Of course. Always happy to help clarify. She hung up a beat too fast. I looked down at my phone. No voicemail. No follow-up text. The bluff had landed. She knew. And now, She'd spend every waking hour wondering just how much I still had and how much of it had already changed hands. William Harding never moved quickly. That was one of the things I respected about him. Former colonel, two-star general before civilian life, and a man who believed speed without discipline was just a dressed-up panic. So when he called me the day after Jenna's awkward phone dance and said, "It's time," I knew the gears had finally started turning. He had reviewed the folder. Every page. Every annotated entry. Digital log. Procurement pattern. The summary I'd created was only the surface. He'd dug deeper, confirmed things I didn't even have access to anymore. "I've seen enough," he told me, "and they're going to wish I hadn't." By noon, an emergency session of Langston's board was underway. Confidential. Off calendar. Legal counsel brought in under sealed memo. The company's general counsel was told to step out after 10 minutes. When that happens, it's not internal anymore. It's containment. 3 hours later, Jenna Riley was placed on administrative leave. Pending internal review, the statement read. Evan Carter followed before the ink dried. Neither of them saw it coming. They thought they were managing optics, getting ahead of a hiccup. But what landed on the table was more than a hiccup. It was a fully indexed, cross-referenced blueprint of systemic fraud tied directly to their approvals, signatures, and actions. And it didn't come from a whistleblower in the trenches. It came from the man who used to sit quietly at the center of it all. The one they retired early without checking what he still had access to. William didn't call me again. He didn't need to. The silence was confirmation. The board had finally opened its eyes. And it didn't like what it saw. The blog post had been sitting in my drafts for 2 weeks. I reread it one last time before clicking publish. Title: What 40 Years Taught Me, and What It Didn't. No accusations. No names. Just reflections. I wrote about the early day hand-drawn schematics, cold morning briefings, seeing the first flight prototype I helped design lift off the runway. I talked about mentorship, patience, what it meant to build something bigger than yourself, and about the quiet grief of watching that something forget who you were. I wrote about change, how sometimes it comes slowly, and sometimes it comes with a folder sliding across a table. I didn't describe what was in the folder. Didn't need to. I simply wrote this. Legacy isn't what you leave behind in documents or design specs. It's what you leave behind in people, in values, in the things you refuse to compromise, no matter how politely they ask. By morning, the post had 0 views. By evening, 0. Then the shares started. Former employees, young engineers, a few quiet nods from competitors, and, buried in the comments, more than a few Langston staffers writing under first names or alias saying, "We knew something was wrong." Others just said, "Thank you." No firestorm. No drama. Just a slow, rising tide of people recognizing truth when they saw it dressed in restraint. It trended for 2 days in aerospace circles. On LinkedIn, someone tagged it as required reading for leadership. Another called it the most graceful takedown I've ever seen. I didn't reply to any of it. Just watched the momentum build, then settle. Because I wasn't trying to go viral. I was just saying goodbye. On my terms. 2 weeks after the audit began, the Department of Defense released its preliminary findings. The language was formal, clinical designed to sound sterile. But the meaning was clear. Irregularities confirmed. Procurement fraud identified. External parties recommended for federal prosecution. That same afternoon, Jenna Riley and Evan Carter were indicted on multiple counts. Conspiracy, misappropriation of federal funds, wire fraud. A press release followed, peppered with phrases like betrayal of public trust and intentional circumvention of compliance standards. Their mugshots were splashed across trade bulletins and forwarded through back-channel emails, faster than any memo ever circulated at Langston. But the company itself? Langston Aerospace avoided blacklisting. Barely. Turns out, cooperating with a federal audit from the outset, providing time-stamped documents, verifiable credentials, and airtight proof of tampering goes a long way when your contracts are worth hundreds of millions. William Harding made sure of it. So did my records. The board issued a statement late Friday evening, buried just enough to avoid headlines, but direct enough to matter. We are grateful for the integrity and diligence of a recently retired senior manager whose historical documentation and commitment to ethical standards played a critical role in our cooperation with federal investigators. No name. No spotlight. Just the truth, tucked between corporate lines. I didn't need more. Because the best kind of vindication isn't loud. It's watching people try to rewrite history and realizing the receipts say otherwise. The first note arrived in a plain white envelope. No return address. Just a single line on company stationery. Thank you for reminding us what leadership looks like. Then came the emails. Old colleagues, former interns, contractors I hadn't spoken to in years. Notes that started with, "I heard what happened," and ended with, "You made more of a difference than you know." I didn't reply to all of them. Couldn't. But I read every single one. A week later, Megan sent me a package. Inside was a wooden plaque, handcrafted, no logo, no corporate seal, just a single engraved line. For the quiet ones who see everything. I smiled. Megan always knew how to say more with fewer words. Then came the real surprise. A group of former coworkers organized an unofficial send-off. They rented out a small hall near the old office, invited a mix of current and retired staff. I didn't expect much. Figured I'd shake a few hands, tell a few stories, head home early. But when I walked in, the room stood. People I hadn't seen in 10 years. Engineers from the shop floor, logistics staff, 2 janitors, my old secretary from '94, all clapping. Not out of obligation, out of memory. Someone handed me a slice of cake. Another pressed a handwritten note into my hand. No speeches, no presentations. Just one long, quiet ovation that said everything without a single word spoken. For 40 years, I kept my head down and my standards high. I never asked for applause. But that night, standing in a rented hall, surrounded by people who understood what had been risked and what had been protected, I realized something. Sometimes the people who watch quietly from the sidelines are the ones who hold the line when it matters most. And sometimes, if you're lucky, they remember. The cabin sits on the north edge of Lake Grantham, tucked between a row of pines and a stretch of shoreline, where the water stays glass, still most mornings. We found it by accident. Carol saw the listing while browsing for something quiet, but not too remote. It was both. 2 bedrooms. Wrap-around porch. No neighbors in sight. The first night we moved in, I unpacked my books, lined them neatly on the shelf, and left a single folder in the desk drawer, one with the last of my Langston documents. I hadn't opened it in months. Didn't need to. Some endings don't require punctuation. By the second week, I'd started doing part-time consulting. Nothing high profile. No titles. Just quiet work mentoring young engineers who were still learning that leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about knowing when not to speak and when to stand your ground. I met them in coffee shops and online calls. Reviewed systems. Flagged gaps. Listened more than I talked. The questions they asked weren't about tech. Not really. They were about responsibility. Integrity. How to hold a line when the pressure builds and the easy answer starts looking awfully reasonable. I told them what I knew. And what I'd learned the hard way. Sometimes Carol would peek her head into my office mid-session, holding up a mug or raising an eyebrow. She still worried I was working too much. I'd wave her off and promise to log off before sunset. Always did. Because when you've spent 4 decades chasing deadlines and dodging internal politics, you start to realize the most valuable currency you'll ever earn is time. Unclaimed, unbothered, unburdened time. Each evening, I'd step onto the porch with a cup of coffee or a cold drink. Scooter, aging Labrador, resting at my feet. Carol would sit beside me, reading or just watching the trees sway. Sometimes, I'd think about Jenna or Evan. Not often, just enough to remember the lesson. That doing the right thing might not make headlines, but it makes peace. The sun would drop behind the lake like a soft exhale, and the sky would turn that kind of gold you only notice when there's nothing left to chase. And I'd smile. Not because I won, but because I didn't lose myself to win. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.